Funny how the world only sees your worth when you're dressed for it. The security guard didn't even look him in the eyes as he said it, just a flat voice under the warm glow of the ballroom lights, as if the man standing in front of him wasn't really a man at all. Ethan Cole didn't argue. He just nodded once, quietly, and stepped back onto the sidewalk as the glass doors shut behind him with a soft, final click. Inside, laughter floated through crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses clinked, and men in tailored suits shook hands over million-dollar conversations. Outside, the night air cut through his thin jacket like it didn't belong to the same world. He pulled the fabric tighter around himself, though it barely helped, the cold slipping through every seam. Just a few feet away, a polished black car rolled up to the curb, headlights reflecting off the wet pavement, and for a brief second, his reflection flickered in the glass, unshaven, hollow-eyed, a ghost of someone he barely recognized. A year ago, that same entrance would have opened for him without question. A year ago, his name alone would have turned heads before he even stepped out of the car. But tonight, he was just another man being told to leave. Ethan lowered himself onto the edge of a stone planter across the street, watching the silhouettes move behind the tall windows, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air. In his pocket, his fingers brushed against something crumpled. He pulled it out slowly, a worn, folded business card, the ink faded but still legible under the streetlight. Ethan Cole, Chief Executive Officer. He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, and turned it over between his fingers like it belonged to someone else entirely. A gust of wind swept down the block, carrying the faint scent of rain and city noise, and he tucked the card back into his pocket as if hiding it from the world. A couple walked past him, heels clicking, laughter easy, their conversation dipping just enough for him to catch a fragment. People like that just give up. He didn't look up, didn't react. He had heard worse. What surprised him wasn't the judgment anymore, but how quickly it had replaced everything else. Not long ago, people leaned in when he spoke. Now, they leaned away. Time stretched in that quiet, suspended way it does when you have nowhere to be and no one expecting you. Cars came and went. The music inside rose and fell. And Ethan sat there, invisible to everyone passing by, everyone except one person. Across the street, beneath a flickering street lamp, a small diner sign buzzed softly, casting a pale glow onto the sidewalk. The door opened, and a young woman stepped out, tying her apron loosely at her waist as she paused to stretch her tired shoulders. She glanced up, scanning the street, her eyes lingering just a moment longer than anyone else's had. Not with pity, not with discomfort, just curiosity, and then something quieter, something steady. She hesitated, just for a second, as if deciding whether to turn back inside or take a step forward. And for the first time that night, someone actually saw him. She should have turned back inside. The warmth, the hum of the diner, the predictable rhythm of refilling coffee cups and wiping down counters was easier than stepping into the unknown. But Lily Harper did not move. Not yet. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her apron as she watched him from across the street. The way he sat so still it almost felt deliberate, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that had already decided he did not belong. She had seen people like him before, at least from a distance. People others avoided. People who became part of the background. But something about him did not fit that quiet category her mind usually placed them in. It was not just the worn jacket or the unshaven face. It was the way he held himself. Even now, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, but not broken, not completely. There was a kind of stillness that felt intentional, like he was waiting, or remembering, or both. Lily exhaled slowly, the cool air brushing against her skin as she stepped off the curb before she could second-guess herself. The street was not busy, just a few passing cars, their headlights sweeping across the pavement in brief flashes of light. Each step felt louder than it should have, her shoes tapping softly until she reached the other side. For a moment, she hesitated again, standing just a few feet away from him, close enough now to see the details others would miss. His hands were rough, fingers slightly curled from the cold, but clean. His shoes were worn, but once expensive. And his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were not empty. They were tired, yes, but sharp, aware, almost guarded. Not the look of someone who had given up. "Hey," she said gently, her voice careful, not too loud, not too soft. Ethan blinked, as if adjusting to the fact that someone was actually speaking to him. Most people did not. He straightened just slightly, enough to acknowledge her without fully rising. "Evening," he replied, his voice low, steady, not what she expected. Not broken, not defeated, just quiet. Lily nodded once, glancing back toward the diner before looking at him again. "You have not eaten, have you?" It was not an accusation, not even a question, really, just an observation wrapped in concern. Ethan let out a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I have had worse days," he said, which was not an answer at all. Lily tilted her head slightly, studying him for a second longer, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded receipt with a $10 bill tucked inside. She paused, looking at it, then at him, as if reconsidering something. Instead of holding it out immediately, she stepped closer and sat down on the edge of the planter beside him, close enough that the distance between them no longer felt like two different worlds. That seemed to catch him off guard more than anything. People might toss money from a distance. They did not sit. "I get off my shift in 10 minutes, she said, smoothing the receipt between her fingers. "They are about to throw out the last batch of soup. It is still good. If you want, you can come inside. Sit somewhere warm. No one is going to say anything." Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, searching her expression for something he had learned to expect from others. Pity, discomfort, obligation. But it was not there. Just a quiet kind of certainty, like she had already decided he was worth the invitation before he even answered. His gaze flickered briefly to the diner, then back to her. "Why?" he asked, the words simple but loaded, not defensive, just honest. Lily did not answer right away. She glanced down at the $10 bill in her hand, then folded it back into her pocket as if it no longer belonged in this moment. When she looked back up, her voice was softer. "Because you are still here," she said. "That counts for something." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan did not have a response ready. He just sat there, the weight of her words settling somewhere deeper than he expected, something small and unfamiliar shifting in the quiet space between them. Ethan did not remember the last time he walked into a place like that without being announced. The bell above the diner door gave a soft chime as Lily pushed it open, holding it just long enough for him to step inside. Warm air wrapped around him instantly, carrying the scent of coffee, toasted bread, and something slow-cooked and comforting. It was almost disorienting, the contrast so sharp it made him pause just past the threshold. For a second, he considered turning back, retreating into the cold where expectations were lower and eyes did not linger as long. But Lily was already moving, glancing back at him with a small nod as if to say it was okay, as if he belonged there simply because she said he did. He followed. The diner was not crowded, just a few late-night regulars scattered across booths, a muted television playing above the counter, and a cook in the back wiping down the grill. No one paid much attention at first, which Ethan appreciated more than he expected. Lily slipped behind the counter with practiced ease, hanging her apron on a hook before grabbing a clean bowl. "Sit wherever you want," she said over her shoulder, already moving toward the kitchen. "I will be right back." Ethan hesitated, then chose a booth near the window, the same streetlights still visible outside, casting a faint glow through the glass. He sat slowly, hands resting on the table, unsure what to do with them now that they were not tucked into his pockets. His eyes drifted across the room, taking in small details out of habit. The way the cashier organized receipts in neat stacks, the slight flicker in one of the overhead lights, the rhythm of the place, systems, patterns. It was instinct, the part of him that used to read rooms before anyone else noticed there was anything to read at all. Lily returned a minute later, setting the bowl in front of him along with a spoon and a glass of water. Steam rose gently from the surface, carrying a rich, savory smell that made something tighten unexpectedly in his chest. "It is chicken soup," she said, sliding into the seat across from him without asking. "End of the night special." There was a hint of a smile in her voice, light but real. Ethan looked down at the bowl, then back at her. "You did not have to sit," he said quietly. Lily shrugged one shoulder, resting her elbows lightly on the table. "I know." She glanced at him, studying his reaction more than the situation itself. "But I wanted to." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the diner filled the space between them, soft and steady. Ethan picked up the spoon, his movements slower than usual, as if he was adjusting to the idea that this was actually happening. The first bite was warm, simple, and unexpectedly grounding. He had eaten before, of course, whatever he could manage, but this felt different. Not just food. Something else. Something human. Lily watched him for a second, then looked away, giving him space without making it obvious. "You always sit out there?" she asked after a moment, her tone casual but curious. Ethan paused, the spoon hovering briefly before he set it down. "Not always," he said. "It was the truth, just not the whole truth." Lily nodded slowly, accepting the answer for what it was without pushing further. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms in a relaxed way. "You do not seem like someone who belongs out there," she said. There was no judgment in it, just observation. Ethan let out a quiet breath, his gaze drifting back to the window. The reflection staring back at him was still the same man from earlier, but something about the setting made it feel less permanent. "Belonging is a flexible concept," he replied. Lily tilted her head, considering that. "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe people just decide too quickly where someone fits." Ethan looked at her again, really looked this time, noticing the way she held eye contact without forcing it, the way her words were simple but intentional. Most people talked around things. She spoke through them. His hand moved unconsciously toward his pocket, fingers brushing against the folded business card again, the edges worn from being handled too often. He did not take it out. Not yet. Instead, he picked up the spoon again and took another bite, the warmth settling deeper this time. For the first time in a long while, the night did not feel endless. It felt paused, and in that pause, something unfamiliar began to take shape. Not hope, not yet, but something close enough to recognize when it arrived. The diner had quieted even more by the time Ethan finished the last spoonful, the clock above the counter ticking closer to midnight as chairs began to flip onto tables one by one. Lily stood to clear a nearby booth, moving with a rhythm that suggested she had done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands, yet there was nothing mechanical about it. She still noticed things. Small things. Like the way Ethan carefully set the spoon down instead of letting it clatter, or how he wiped the edge of the bowl with a napkin before pushing it slightly forward, as if leaving it cleaner than he found it mattered. Most people would not have seen that. She did. "You can stay a little longer," she said without looking directly at him, stacking plates in her hands. "We close in about 20 minutes, but no one is going to rush you out." Ethan nodded once, though part of him was already calculating the moment he would need to step back into the cold. "I appreciate it," he replied, his voice steady but quieter now, as if the warmth had softened something inside him he was not used to feeling. Lily carried the dishes behind the counter, then returned with a small towel, wiping down the table across from him before leaning against it casually. "So," she said, tilting her head slightly, "what do you do when you are not sitting out there watching the world ignore you?" There was a hint of lightness in her tone, not mocking, just enough to make the question feel less heavy than it actually was. Ethan let out a faint breath, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to acknowledge it. "I used to answer that question very differently," he said. Lily raised an eyebrow, intrigued but patient. "Used to?" He hesitated, fingers brushing again against the folded card in his pocket, the edges pressing against his palm like a reminder of something unfinished. For a moment, he considered pulling it out, placing it on the table, letting the truth speak for itself. But something held him back. Not fear. Not exactly. More like timing. "Now," he continued instead, choosing his words carefully, "I try to stay out of the way." Lily frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in quiet consideration. "That does not sound like a long-term plan," she said. Ethan glanced toward the window again, the reflection staring back at him no longer quite as distant as before. "It was not supposed to be," he admitted. The honesty in that sentence lingered longer than either of them expected. Lily pushed herself off the table and walked toward the counter, reaching for a pen and a small notepad. She scribbled something quickly, then tore the page out and walked back over, placing it in front of him. "We open at 6 in the morning," she said. "I usually get here around 5:30. If you are looking for something to do that is not staying out of the way, you can come help me set up. Nothing fancy. Just coffee, prep work, that kind of thing." Ethan looked down at the paper, his eyes scanning the simple address and time, though he already knew where he was. It was not about the information. It was about the offer. "You do not even know me, he said quietly. Lily met his gaze without hesitation. I know enough, she replied. There was no dramatic emphasis, no attempt to convince him. Just a calm certainty that made arguing feel unnecessary. In the background, the cook called out that he was heading out, the back door swinging open and closed with a soft thud. The diner felt smaller now, more intimate, like a space that was slowly folding in on itself for the night. Ethan picked up the piece of paper, folding it once, then again, before slipping it into his pocket beside the old business card. The two pieces pressed together, past and present occupying the same space for the first time. He stood slowly, the movement deliberate, as if marking a transition he was not fully ready to name. 5:30, he repeated, more to himself than to her. Lily nodded once, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips. Only if you want to, she added, giving him an out he did not actually need. Ethan paused near the door, his hand resting lightly on the handle as he glanced back at her. For a brief second, something unspoken passed between them, something steady and unfamiliar. Then he stepped outside again, the cold meeting him like it had before, but this time, it did not feel quite as absolute. And in his pocket, for the first time in a long while, he was carrying more than just a reminder of who he used to be. The street was quieter than before, the kind of silence that settled in just before dawn when the city had not quite decided to wake up again. Ethan sat on the same stone planter, his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. But this time, there was something different in the way he carried himself. Not stronger. Not yet. Just anchored. His fingers brushed against the folded paper Lily had given him, the edges now soft from being handled more than once, and beneath it, the old business card pressed back like a memory refusing to stay buried. Two versions of his life, resting in the same pocket. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath fade into the cool air, his eyes drifting to the diner across the street. The lights were off now, the sign dimmed, the door locked. For the first time in a long while, he was not just waiting for the night to pass. He was waiting for something to begin. He did not sleep much. Not because he could not, but because his mind kept circling back to something unfamiliar. A choice. 5:30. It sounded simple when she said it, almost insignificant, but the weight of it settled differently in his chest. Show up, or do not. Stay invisible, or step back into a world that required something from him. When the sky began to lighten, just a faint gray stretching across the horizon, Ethan stood. His legs protested slightly from the cold, but he ignored it, brushing off his jacket as if that small gesture mattered. As if it meant he was preparing for something more than just another day. The walk across the street felt shorter this time. The door was still locked, but a soft glow flickered from inside, moving shadows shifting behind the glass. He hesitated for a second, his hand hovering near the handle, then tapped lightly against the door instead. The sound echoed softer than he expected. A moment later, the lock clicked, and the door opened just enough for Lily to peek out, her hair pulled back, a light jacket draped over her shoulders. She blinked once, surprised, then smiled in a way that was not exaggerated or forced. Just real. You are early, she said, stepping back to let him in. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall out of habit. 5:28. I used to be earlier, he replied quietly. Lily tilted her head, catching the weight behind that sentence, but choosing not to press it. Well, she said, grabbing a fresh apron and tossing it lightly in his direction. You can start by helping me with the coffee. That machine is stubborn if you do not treat it right. Ethan caught the apron, his fingers tightening around the fabric for a brief second, as if grounding himself in the reality of the moment. He stepped behind the counter, the space unfamiliar but not uncomfortable, his eyes scanning the layout instinctively. Systems. Again. Always systems. He moved toward the coffee machine, examining it for just a moment before adjusting the filter, measuring the grounds without needing to be told twice. Lily watched from the side, arms crossed loosely, a small smile forming as she noticed the precision in his movements. You have done this before? She asked casually. Ethan shook his head once. Not exactly, he said, focusing on the machine as it began to hum to life. Lily nodded, not fully convinced, but not questioning it either. Instead, she handed him a stack of clean mugs. Then you are a fast learner, she said. The simple acknowledgement landed differently than anything else had in days. Not pity. Not charity. Recognition. The first customers began to trickle in as the sky brightened, the rhythm of the diner returning slowly, naturally. Orders were taken, coffee was poured, and somewhere between wiping counters and restocking napkins, Ethan realized something he had not felt in a long time. He was not just existing in the space. He was part of it. And as the morning light filtered through the windows, catching on the glass and the metal surfaces, reflecting small fragments of a world that once felt completely out of reach, Ethan found himself standing a little straighter, moving a little more deliberately. Not because the world had changed, but because, for the first time in a long while, someone had given him a reason to step back into it. By mid-morning, the diner had settled into its familiar rhythm, the kind that moved without thinking, where every sound had its place and every motion followed something unspoken. Plates slid across the counter, coffee refilled before it was asked for, and conversations rose and fell like background music that never quite demanded attention. Ethan moved within it quietly, but not uncertainly. If anything, there was a growing precision in the way he worked, a natural awareness that did not belong to someone new. He noticed when the line began to build before anyone said a word. He adjusted the pace without being told, stacking tasks in his mind like pieces of a system he used to run on a much larger scale. Lily caught it more than once. The way he anticipated problems before they happened. The way he turned small inefficiencies into smoother flow without drawing attention to himself. It was subtle, but it was there. "You do not just learn fast," she said at one point, leaning beside him as he restocked the sugar packets with almost exact symmetry. "You already know how things are supposed to work." Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over the counter before he placed the last packet down. "I have seen a few systems before," he replied simply. Lily studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not in suspicion but in curiosity that had begun to deepen. There was more to him. That much was obvious now, but she did not push. Instead, she handed him a fresh pot of coffee and nodded toward a booth in the corner. "Table 4 is on their third refill," she said. "They will pretend they do not want more, but they do." Ethan allowed the faintest hint of a smile before walking over, the pot steady in his hand. The couple at the booth barely looked up at first, but when he spoke, his tone calm and measured, something shifted. "Would you like a refill?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it carried a quiet confidence that made it feel more intentional than routine. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, sure." As Ethan poured the coffee, he noticed the small details again. The way the man tapped his fingers lightly against the table. The way the woman glanced at the door every few seconds. Waiting for someone. Or something. Patterns. Always patterns. When he returned to the counter, Lily was watching him again, though this time she did not look away when he noticed. "You pay attention differently," she said. Ethan set the pot down, his expression unreadable for a moment. "I used to have to," he replied. Lily tilted her head slightly. "Used to," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Before he could respond, the bell above the door chimed again, louder this time as a man in a tailored coat stepped inside, shaking off the morning chill. He paused just inside, scanning the room briefly before his eyes landed on Ethan. And in that instant, something shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but Lily saw it. The way Ethan's posture changed by half an inch. The way his shoulders straightened, not out of tension, but recognition. The man's expression flickered, surprise crossing his face before it settled into something more controlled, more measured. He took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "Ethan," he said, the name landing in the space like it did not belong there, like it carried a weight the diner was not built to hold. Conversations around them continued, oblivious, but at the counter, time seemed to pause again. Lily glanced between them, her brows drawing together slightly. Ethan did not answer right away. His fingers tightened just enough against the edge of the counter, the familiar pressure of the folded card and Lily's note in his pocket suddenly feeling heavier than before. The past had a way of finding him. He had always known that. He just had not expected it to walk through the door this soon. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but quieter than before. "Not here," he said. The man hesitated, then nodded once, understanding more than he let on. And just like that, the fragile space Ethan had begun to rebuild inside the diner shifted again, no longer just about what he was becoming, but about what was catching up to him. The man did not order anything. He stood near the entrance for a moment longer than necessary, as if deciding whether to stay or leave, but his eyes never left Ethan. There was recognition there, and something heavier beneath it. Not surprise alone. History. Lily felt it even if she did not understand it yet. She moved slightly closer to the counter, her voice low but steady. "Friend of yours?" she asked, not looking away from the man. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a brief second before returning to the room, as if recalibrating himself. "Something like that," he said. It was not a denial, but it was not an explanation either. The man finally stepped forward, his shoes quiet against the tile, his presence shifting the air around him in a way that did not belong to the diner. He stopped just a few feet from the counter, his expression composed now, controlled in the way people learned to be when too much was at stake. "We have been looking for you," he said, his voice measured, careful not to draw attention. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not react beyond that. "I was not hard to find," he replied. The man glanced briefly around the diner, then back at Ethan. "Not if you knew where to look," he said. Lily's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the counter, her instincts sharpening. This was not random. This was not coincidence. She looked at Ethan again, really looked, and for the first time, the pieces began to shift in her mind. The way he moved, the way he observed, the way he spoke like someone who had once been listened to. "Who are you?" she asked quietly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Ethan did not answer right away. His hand moved into his pocket, fingers brushing against the folded paper she had given him, then the business card beneath it. Two lives, still colliding. He pulled the card out slowly, placing it on the counter between them. The motion was simple, but the weight behind it was not. Lily's eyes dropped to it, scanning the worn print, the faded letters that still held their shape. Ethan Cole, Chief Executive Officer. The words did not belong to the man standing in front of her. Not the way she had known him. Not the way she had seen him. She looked up at him, confusion flickering across her face, followed by something sharper. "You are," she started, but the sentence did not finish. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time since she had met him, there was no deflection, no distance. Just truth. "I was," he said. The man beside them shifted slightly, stepping closer. "You still are," he corrected. "Whether you want it or not." The diner noise continued around them, unaware of the shift happening in that small space at the counter. Orders were called, coffee poured, laughter carried on like nothing had changed. But for Lily, everything had. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man who had sat across from her the night before with the one standing here now, connected to something far larger than she had imagined. "You lied," she said finally, her voice not loud, but steady enough to land. Ethan shook his head once, a small movement, but firm. "I did not tell you everything," he said. "That is not the same." Lily held his gaze, searching for something, anything that would make it easier to understand. "It feels the same," she replied softly. The man beside them cleared his throat, his patience thinning slightly. "We do not have much time," he said, lowering his voice further. "Things are moving again. The board is calling for you. They cannot hold it off any longer." Ethan's eyes flickered, something sharper surfacing beneath the calm he had been holding on to. The past was not just catching up. It was pulling him back. He glanced at Lily again, the moment stretching just long enough to say more than words could. Then he looked back at the man. "I said not here," he repeated, his tone firmer this time. The man nodded once. "Then we will talk outside." He stepped back toward the door, giving Ethan space, but not distance. Lily watched them both, the weight of everything settling in slowly, heavily. The man she had invited in from the cold was not who she thought he was. Or maybe he was exactly that, just more. And as Ethan reached for the edge of the counter, steadying himself for a moment before stepping away, she realized something that unsettled her more than the truth itself. She had seen his worth before she knew any of this, and now she had to decide what that meant. The door closed behind them with a soft click, muting the steady rhythm of the diner as the cool morning air settled around them once again. Ethan stepped onto the sidewalk, his posture different now, not defensive, not withdrawn, but steady in a way that suggested he had already made a decision before walking out. The man followed, stopping a few feet away, his hands slipping into the pockets of his tailored coat as he studied Ethan carefully. "You should not have disappeared like that," he said, his voice low but firm, the kind of tone used when consequences had already been discussed too many times. Ethan did not react immediately. His gaze drifted down the street, watching the early traffic begin to build, people moving forward with their day without knowing how close they were to something that had once controlled so much of it. "I did not disappear," he said finally. "I stepped away." The man exhaled, a quiet frustration slipping through his composure. "You walked away from everything," he corrected. "From the company, from the board, from the people who depended on you." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. "From the people who made it impossible to stay," he replied. The man held his gaze, searching for something. Maybe the version of Ethan he used to know, the one who would have fought harder, pushed back louder. "It is not over," he said. "What happened? It is coming apart. The internal review is reopening. The evidence that was buried is starting to surface. They need you back." Ethan's eyes flickered, something sharper moving beneath the calm surface, something that had not fully disappeared. "They need a name," he said. "Not me." The man shook his head once. "They need both," he insisted. "The board is divided. Half of them want to restore you quietly. The other half," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "they are preparing for a public fight." Ethan let out a slow breath, his attention shifting back toward the diner for just a second, the faint silhouette of Lily visible through the window as she moved behind the counter. "And you think I should walk back into that?" he asked. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "I think you never stopped belonging there," he said. "You just forgot it." Ethan did not respond right away. Instead, his hand moved into his pocket again, fingers brushing against the folded note Lily had given him, the edges now softened by time and handling. Beneath it, the business card pressed back, a reminder of everything the man in front of him was talking about. Power, control, responsibility. But the note felt different. Lighter, simpler, real. He pulled it out slowly, unfolding it just enough to glance at the time written in Lily's handwriting. 5:30. It had already passed, but the meaning behind it had not. Show up, or do not. Stay invisible, or step forward. The man watched him, following the movement. "You cannot stay here," he said, not unkindly, but with a certainty that assumed the decision had already been made. Ethan folded the paper again, more carefully this time, before slipping it back into his pocket. "I am not staying," he said. The man nodded once, relief flickering across his expression. "Good," he replied. "Then come with me. We can start fixing this before it gets worse." Ethan looked at him, really looked this time, and for a brief second, the old version of him surfaced, the one who understood strategy, timing, consequences. But then his gaze shifted back to the diner window, to the reflection of a space where he had been seen without any of that. "I will come back," he said finally, "but not the way you expect." The man frowned slightly, confusion breaking through his composure. "What does that mean?" Ethan did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped past him, moving toward the door again, his hand reaching for the handle. "It means," he said quietly, "I am not rebuilding what I had." He paused, just long enough for the words to settle. "I am deciding what is worth building now." And with that, he pushed the door open, stepping back inside. Not as someone being pulled into the past, but as someone choosing where he would stand before facing it. When Ethan stepped back inside, the warmth felt different this time, not just something to escape into, but something he had chosen. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Lily looked up immediately, her eyes finding him before anything else. She had been watching the door. That much was clear. There was no confusion in her expression now, no surprise, just a quiet tension, like she had been holding a question she was not sure she wanted answered. Ethan walked toward the counter slowly, his movements deliberate, aware of the space, of the people, of her. The diner continued around them, orders being called, coffee poured, the world refusing to pause for personal revelations, but in the space between them, everything had already shifted. Lily set the coffee pot down, her hand stilling for just a second before she crossed her arms lightly, not defensive, but steady. "So," she said, her voice calm but carrying more weight than before, "which part of you is real?" Ethan stopped a few feet from her, the question landing exactly where it needed to. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded note first, placing it gently on the counter. Then he set the worn business card beside it. 2 pieces of paper. 2 lives. Both, he said simply. Lily looked down at them, her eyes moving between the clean handwriting she recognized and the faded print that still carried authority. She let out a small breath, not quite frustration, not quite acceptance. That is not how it feels, she replied softly. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging it without trying to argue. I know, he said. There was a pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to force honesty into the space, whether either of them was ready for it or not. When you saw me last night, he continued, his voice quieter now, but steady. You saw me without any of this. His hand hovered briefly over the business card before pulling back. No title, no history, no expectations. Lily met his gaze, something in her expression softening despite herself. I saw someone who needed a meal, she said. Ethan shook his head slightly, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth, not amused, but certain. You saw someone worth sitting with, he corrected. The words settled between them, heavier than anything else he had said. Lily looked away for a second, her eyes drifting toward the window, toward the street where she had first noticed him. And now, she asked quietly. Ethan did not hesitate this time. Now you see everything else, he said, and you get to decide if it changes anything. Lily let that sit, her fingers tapping lightly against the counter, a small habit she had when she was thinking. Around them, the diner continued its steady rhythm, customers unaware of the quiet decision forming in the middle of it. Finally, she reached forward, sliding the business card back toward him, but leaving her note where it was. That part, she said, nodding toward the card. That is your world. Then she tapped the folded paper gently. This is where you showed up. Ethan looked at the note, then back at her, understanding settling in slowly, clearly. And you think they cannot exist together? He said. Lily shrugged lightly, though her eyes stayed on his. I think one of them is easier to believe in, she replied. Ethan picked up the note, unfolding it slightly before folding it again with more care, then placing it back into his pocket. This time, he did not reach for the card. He left it on the counter, right where she had pushed it. Then I will make them exist. Together, he said. There was no grand